Welcome to Texans on Tap, a little bonus off-season action. I'm Brandon Strange with SportsMap.com's editor, Josh Jordan. You can read his work on SportsMap and follow him on X at JoshJordan975. If you're running across the channel for the first time, hello, and do us a favor, hit like on this video, and to see more of these bonus episodes, subscribe to the channel, and we'll come up in your feed as you're scrolling down YouTube looking for, I don't know, your next review of your next guitar review on Andertons, looking at you, Josh. Watching the latest episode of Hanging with Dr. Z, which is one of my personal guilty pleasures, or searching for some DIY video on how to flush your tankless water heater. Spoiler, it requires vinegar, a fountain pump, a bucket, and 2 hoses. There you go. You can skip to the end now. Josh, you're going to be shocked, but Colin Cowherd said something that has ruffled Texans fans' feathers. Actually, you're not going to be shocked because that's Cowherd shtick, and also you've already seen this video. So he predicts Houston will not make the playoffs next year. He has the Colts winning the division and the Jags capturing the wild card. His reason being, he thinks the strength of the Texans' schedule will cause them to regress by a game or two, and says perhaps there's a sophomore slump coming for CJ Stroud. I mean, all things considered, not the craziest thing I've ever heard, but him saying that he's basing his picks and who's getting into the playoff picture based on the best quarterbacks, yet he somehow leaves out the unanimous runaway offensive rookie of the year and undisputed most important position on the field. What was your reaction to Cowherd's take here?
Well, he's just kind of flip-flopped over them pretty much all season long, right? He started out a lot of criticism of the Texans for drafting Stroud, saying they should have passed on quarterback and held on to wait for this upcoming draft to get a different quarterback. And obviously now, one in the hand's worth, two in the bush. You have the rookie of the year in CJ Stroud, whereas all these other quarterbacks are just they're prospects at this point. We don't know what they're going to be. So clearly the Texans made the call on that and they got it right. And Cowherd throughout the year, he does his whole segment about what Colin got wrong. And he came around to CJ and said he didn't see this coming. And he praised him a lot as he put on a great year. And he was really fun to watch. So, but you kind of revert back to your initial feelings on players, and he never really thought Stroud was athletic enough to succeed at the next level. So here he is picking a more athletic quarterback in Anthony Richardson and the Colts to win the division, a guy that, he's been injured. And it wasn't just the final injury that put him out for the year. He got dinged up throughout the course of his first few games of his rookie season. So that's what kind of surprises me a little bit, is that he had surgery on his throwing shoulder, and to project that he's all of a sudden going to be great this upcoming year and going to take the next step. I mean, you just don't know that. I see a lot of people, running down Deshaun Watson saying like, oh, what's he going to be after having surgery to his throwing shoulder? Well, that's what Anthony Richardson's dealing with, and he's a rookie. So, with Colin, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. One of his other points was that just, once coaches have a certain amount of tape on a player, that it's a whole new ball game, and that could lead to a sophomore slump for CJ. But I'd also point out there was a ton of tape on him last year before they played the Browns in the playoffs, and they were the number one defense according to yards, and CJ didn't have a problem with that defense, man. He had a good game. I know the defense helped him out as well, the Texans defense, that is. But there was a ton of tape on CJ, and he played very well. So I'm not so sure teams are going to have an answer for what CJ Stroud can do next season.
Well, one of his other points was, he says the Jags were 8-3 before Trevor Lawrence got hurt. Yeah, okay, but remind me who one of those 3 losses was to and how close that was, right? Not close. And then the rematch to the Texans, where the Texans lost, was by a field goal.
Yep.
So I don't really and that was before CJ Stroud had really even hit his stride. Trevor Lawrence had already had way more games under his belt in the league. So again, not to say, I'm not trying to knock Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence appears to be a good quarterback, but CJ did in his first year what Trevor Lawrence has really failed to do with the Jags since he's been there, which is a point that you made during our pre-show here. So, like I said, it's not crazy to think the Texans could regress based on schedule. But in your mind, Josh, what is the area the Texans must address for them to prevent having that sort of regression and missing the playoffs next year or this year?
Well, I mean, there's a few things, right? The running game has to improve. However they do it, whether they upgrade at running back or they upgrade maybe at left guard, something like that, and better blocking from their tight ends, whatever it is, they got to get the running game going. In that Ravens game, they couldn't score in the playoffs. That was a big problem. So you're going to need Tank Dell to be healthy. I think adding another receiver wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world. As much as I love Nico and Tank Dell, they get hurt, and you saw what happened when they're out. There's not a lot going on the offense for the Texans, so I think that'll be big. And then of course the defense. As good as they were last year, we saw the Colts kind of run through them in that final game of the regular season. The Ravens were able to kind of do what they wanted in the second half, really in both games, whether it was Lamar running or whoever. So I think they got to fix that, and they have a lot of holes. 2 out of their 4 defensive linemen are possible free agents. They may not be back, and 2 out of their 3 linebackers are free agents. So I think that's going to be it. They got to get that cleaned up. They got to get that fixed. And D'Amico's the perfect guy. He knows what he needs on that defensive line from his linebackers. I think they'll get it taken care of. And that was one of Cowherd's other points, Brandon, was how much cap space the Colts have. Well, the Texans have a whole lot of cap space too. I mean, I think the Texans are 7th, right behind the Colts in salary cap space this year, according to PFF. So I'm not so sure that that's a big advantage that they have. They both have extra money to spend, and let me point out too with the Colts, Anthony Richardson. Well, Colin brings up, well, Gardner Minshew, he came in and look how good they did with him. Well, guess what? He's a free agent. Gardner Minshew made the Pro Bowl this year. I'm not so sure he's going to be back with the Colts. I think he's going to have better opportunities to play, and he'll probably go elsewhere. So if Anthony Richardson gets dinged up with the concussion like he did last year, or maybe that shoulder's not quite right, and he's a running quarterback, he's going to get slammed into the ground on that repaired shoulder over and over and over again. And if you don't have Gardner Minshew there, that could be tough for the Colts. I think his big takeaway, and you mentioned the schedule, and I looked this up, the main difference between the Texans and the Colts schedule this year really comes down to 3 games. Out of the West, the Texans are going to have to get the Chiefs. Ugh, tough, right? Where the Colts are going to get the Broncos. They're probably going to have a new quarterback. I don't think Russell Wilson's going to be back. And then you look at the NFC East, Texans face the Cowboys, where the Colts get the Giants. The Giants were awful last year. That'll probably continue. And then the final one is Texans have to play the Ravens, where they get the Steelers. So I get it. If this division does come down to a game or two, those are 3 big games right there where the Colts do have a big advantage in the opponents they face.
I'm going to put you on the spot because we talked about both the Colts and Texans having this cap space to make moves. Do you think, or I should say, where do you think the Texans focus the majority of that cap space on? We know they have a ton of holes on defense. They have a lot of positions to address. Do you foresee any specific area of need where they use maybe a chunk of that cap space to make a splashy move?
I think it's going to be on the defensive line because D'Amico told us as much. He's like, we got to get better at defensive tackle. If they don't bring back Gernard, you're going to need another edge rusher. So I think that's where it's going to start for these guys. And there's a lot of good, expensive options on the market. There's some good linebackers out there with Queen from the Ravens, but man, he's going to cost a lot of money. So I think it's going to be there, but let's not rule out corner. Steven Nelson's a free agent. They don't really have a legitimate, he can go out there and play today corner outside of Stingley. Everybody else is a free agent. So corner, I think, is a spot where they could go either get Nelson back, or they could go maybe after Xavier Howard from the Dolphins, who's been released. There's a few different options, but I think that's what's interesting, right? Is they can only do so much in free agency, and then the rest they're going to have to use the draft to supplement that. And luckily they do have a pick in the first several rounds. So no big deal from the Will Anderson trade. You got some good picks there. So, and that's what kind of surprises me. I'm seeing these mock drafts giving the Texans an offensive tackle in the first round. And, I'm just like, they gave Titus Howard so much money, and they've already got Laramie Tunsil. I believe Mel Kiper's the latest to do that. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's going to be defense or possibly a receiver with that first round pick.
Stingley and Nelson were so good last
Yeah.
season at corner, but probably as good as the Texans safeties were bad. So you have to address that, because otherwise, I mean, you're going to get thrown all over next
Des
season.
King, he's a
Yeah.
free agent. He was your, your nickel corner. He's a free agent too, and I know he's a little long in the tooth and not expensive, but he did a pretty good job for you, and we've talked about it on this channel, Brandon. How did they lose games? They were getting shredded through the air.
Yep.
That's how. So,
Yep.
you're gonna need some better corner play and safety play. I mean, there's just no getting around that. Just Jimmy Ward, can you count on him to be available? Safety's another spot they're gonna have to look at, just because he's in his 30s and he's already shown to be injury prone.
No doubt. Well, we're going to keep our eye on that. Obviously, long off season to go. We're going to have free agency, then the draft. So we're excited about all that. So again, if you're not following on this channel, please do so. We really do appreciate it, because we're going
One
to
quick
react.
point before we wrap up, Brandon.
Yeah.
Vegas does not agree with Colin. When we look
Uh-huh.
at the odds for the AFC, the Texans are the 6th favorite to win the AFC. They are behind the Chiefs, Ravens, Bills, Bengals, and Dolphins. You don't see the Jaguars until the 9th, and the Colts are not even in the top 10 according to Vegas to win the AFC. So let's hope Vegas is right here and Colin's wrong.
I think the odds bear out that Vegas is usually right more often than not. And Colin, well, that's why he has a segment reserved for all the times that he's wrong. So we'll talk about it. And obviously, if he is, we're going to make sure to rewind this back and talk about it on this channel, because, hey, we like to make some good natured ribbing at Colin's expense. That's going to be it for this episode. Appreciate you guys jumping in. Again, just want to remind you guys, we're going to be doing these throughout the offseason and reacting to news. So as free agency news comes down, as the draft happens, or leading up to the draft, we're going to be covering that here on this channel. We do appreciate you all watching and supporting. We're looking forward to next season so much. We're really excited. Year tier. I can't even say it. That's how excited I am about it. Year 2 of CJ Stroud is going to be a thing of beauty, I think. I'm really excited about it. So I don't believe in sophomore slumps. I believe in another year of an experienced, talented quarterback. So again, appreciate you guys watching us. Go Texans. Ooh, I got some cleaning up to do on that, don't I?